The laughter started small, a ripple of amusement from the outer rows of the chamber. By the time the display screens finished showing the grainy footage of Earth's Warfleet, the sound had swelled into open ridicule. Representatives from a dozen species leaned back in their seats, barbed voices cutting across the circular hall, each one adding another layer of humiliation. Captain Wesley Grant sat stiff in his uniform, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the hollow projector in the center of the council floor. His ships hung there for all to see, magnified until every crude weld line and armored hull plate seemed to glow under the chamber lights. Steel instead of shimmering alloys. Cannons that spat metal instead of elegant beams. Engines that looked more like industrial drills than drives worthy of space. The room treated the sight as comedy, and the man responsible for commanding those ships sat forced to listen. Beside him, Senator Margaret Keene did not laugh, though the corners of her mouth twitched in irritation as she gripped the railing of their delegation stand. She had endured years of political insults, but even she looked rattled at the sheer volume of mockery pouring down from the tears of alien ministers. "Do they realize we can hear every word?" she muttered under her breath. Wesley did not answer. He was watching the faces more than the ships. He noticed how the larger species leaned forward with an almost predatory ease, the way a predator inspects prey that has no chance of fighting back. He saw the quick, dismissive glances between the Zereth Dominion delegates, their dark-scaled throats vibrating with laughter sharper than knives. It wasn't only mockery. It was judgment. A verdict already decided before Earth had even spoken. The High Speaker, a pale being with translucent skin stretched tight across a skeletal frame, raised a long-fingered hand for silence. The laughter ebbed, though smirks lingered across the chamber. "Humanity has petitioned recognition as a military partner," the speaker intoned, voice carrying like dry wind across a canyon. "We have reviewed their arsenal. Their fleet is functional, though antiquated beyond comparison. These vessels may prove serviceable in limited support roles." Another ripple of amusement ran through the crowd. Margaret leaned closer to Wesley, her voice low but sharp. "Support roles? They are talking about conscripting us as dock workers." He finally spoke, his tone quiet, steady but burning underneath. "It is not our first time being underestimated." Her eyes flicked to him, searching, then returned to the speaker. The declaration continued, each phrase dripping with the careful language of dismissal. Humanity was not to be treated as equals, but as a minor auxiliary force under the protection of the Zereth Dominion. The Dominion's representatives accepted this with thinly veiled satisfaction, their ridged jaws clicking in approval. The chamber moved on, already treating the matter as settled. Wesley remained silent. He knew what his crews were thinking back home watching these feats. Every engineer who had worked with bare hands on plates of cold steel, every pilot who trusted a craft to hold together under punishment, every family who had lost people in past wars, all watching their work and sacrifice turned into a spectacle. The fleet was a museum piece to these aliens. To humans, it was survival welded into shape. Margaret spoke again, but softer this time, almost like she was speaking more to herself than to him. "If they keep laughing, someone is going to mistake us for the joke they think we are." He did not look away from the Dominion delegation, whose scaled shoulders shook with suppressed mirth. "Let them," he said. The session adjourned soon after. Delegates filed out, still murmuring in tones that cut sharper than open insults. Margaret brushed past the glares, keeping her shoulders square, the measured calm of a politician who refused to show cracks in the glass. Wesley followed, boots steady, his silence harder than any rebuttal. As they left the hall, a young attaché rushed into their path, breathless, a folded data slate trembling in her hands. Her face was pale as she handed it to Wesley. "Priority signal, sir. Fleet command." He accepted it, eyes scanning the coded lines. His grip tightened. Margaret noticed. "What is it?" Wesley raised his eyes, and for the first time since the mockery began, his expression changed. The stillness broke, replaced with the cold awareness of a soldier who recognized the moment when peace had already been discarded. "They've already crossed into our space," he said. The corridor went silent except for the faint hum of alien lights overhead. Margaret's breath caught. "Who has?" "The Dominion," he answered. "And they're not sending negotiators." The orders came in fragments, clipped across secured channels, but there was no mistaking their meaning. The Dominion had sent a fleet to escort humanity into obedience. The language was polite, but the intent behind it was the same one Wesley Grant had seen in every empire across history: crush before questions. The carrier Resolute Dawn hung in the darkness of space, its hull scarred from decades of service but alive with light. Crews rushed through its passageways, boots clattering on steel, the hum of engines thrumming like a heartbeat. In the command center, the crew's voices overlapped as tactical screens painted the approaching enemy. 9 Dominion warships, gleaming with polished alloys and sleek design. Lieutenant Nora Ward leaned over her console, dark hair pulled back, eyes darting as data scrolled faster than her fingers could track. She slammed a fist against the panel. They're broadcasting terms of surrender before they've even entered weapons range. That's how confident they are. Across from her, Commander Dylan Mercer stood with arms folded, gaze fixed on the tactical display. Where Nora's face was taut with strain, Dylan's carried a sharp intensity that bordered on excitement. He had studied Dominion tactics for years, poring over simulations and war games. Now he was staring at the real thing. They think the fight's already won, Dylan said quietly. That's their first mistake. Nora shot him a look incredulous. Mistake? Their ships are 10 times faster, their shields can probably eat our railgun rounds for breakfast, and they've got firepower we don't even have names for. Our mistake was showing up. Wesley's voice cut through, calm but unyielding. Enough. Doubt doesn't help us. Options do. Nora hesitated, then pressed her lips tight and turned back to her screen. Wesley stood at the central command chair, though he hadn't sat once since the fleet had deployed. His eyes moved across the hollow displays, not dazzled by the Dominion fleet's sleekness but searching for their arrogance, the blind spots that came when an enemy thought themselves invincible. The comms officer's voice cracked. They've sent another transmission. Repeating demand for surrender. Captain, they say if we power down now, they'll allow us to retain colony rights under Dominion oversight. Margaret Keene's voice carried through from her secure line on Earth. The senator's face was pale, her jaw clenched. That means occupation, Captain. It means we give them the keys and hope they let us keep the front porch. Silence followed. The bridge crew waited. Everyone knew what was at stake, but the weight of saying it out loud felt heavier than steel. Finally, Wesley spoke, his tone steady as carved stone. We are not handing over our world. He looked to his officers. Prepare the fleet. The bridge moved. Voices barked orders, crews adjusted firing solutions, and weapons systems that had been patched together with sweat and stubbornness hummed to life. The Dominion ships drew closer, their formation perfect, every line of movement a display of engineered superiority. Nora's hands shook as she calibrated. She caught herself muttering under her breath. Come on, hold together, just hold together. Dylan glanced at her, his tone sharper than comfort but edged with strange conviction. Our ships don't need to look pretty. They just need to hit hard. The first volley came from the Dominion, streaks of searing light cutting through the black. Shields flared across their gleaming hulls as they fired in unison, a curtain of destructive brilliance. The Resolute Dawn shuddered under the impact. Metal groaned. Warning lights flickered. But the hull held. Armor plating intact, Nora reported, disbelief laced into her tone. Minimal penetration. Another wave struck, brighter, harder. Again the ships groaned but endured. Unlike alien fleets built on shields and grace, humanity's vessels had been designed to take punishment, to outlast storms. They were ugly, stubborn fortresses in space. Return fire, Wesley ordered. Railguns thundered. Slugs of solid metal screamed across the void, accelerated to fractions of light speed. Dominion shields flared as the first rounds hit, absorbing the kinetic punishment with arrogant ease. But then came the second wave and the third. Shields weren't meant for endless physical assault. They cracked, buckled, and finally shattered under the relentless barrage. One Dominion cruiser's hull split open, spilling fire into the void. The bridge went silent for a breathless moment. No one had expected to see one of those ships break so fast. Then the silence erupted into overlapping voices. Confirmed hit. They're scrambling formations. Holy hell, it actually worked. Nora cut in, her voice shaking, not with fear this time but with stunned triumph. Kinetic rounds are bypassing their shield harmonics. They built defense nets for plasma and beams. Not for rocks thrown at impossible speed. Dylan's eyes burned as he leaned closer to his display. They never considered a weapon this primitive could matter. That's their second mistake. The Dominion fleet adjusted, furious now, no longer mocking. Their formations shifted into attack spirals, hurling concentrated fire. Human ships burned under the onslaught, armor splitting, decks venting into space. Each loss was felt like a punch to the chest. Wesley didn't flinch. His voice cut through the chaos. Tighten formation. Force them in close. Make them play our fight. The battle turned brutal. Human ships pushed forward, brawling like street fighters against elegant duelists. Where Dominion ships sliced with precision, humanity smashed, rammed, and tore. The Warfleet looked outdated because it was, but every scar on its armor had been earned through endurance, not decoration. And endurance was a weapon the Dominion had never learned to fear. The battle ended in wreckage. 4 Dominion ships destroyed, 3 more crippled, the survivors limping back into the void. Humanity's fleet was bleeding too, several destroyers lost, the Resolute Dawn wounded but alive. On the bridge, silence hung heavy. Exhaustion lined every face. Nora's voice broke the quiet, softer this time, disbelief thick in every word. We actually sent them running? But her relief faded when the recovery crews began pulling data from the enemy wreckage. She scrolled through it, her expression tightening. These weren't just warships. They were carrying ground units. Dropships, atmospheric craft, full invasion loadouts. Wesley turned toward her. Say it. Her voice trembled, not from fear but from the realization of what it meant. They weren't here to escort us anywhere. They were here to take Earth. The words settled like ash across the room. Wesley stood unmoving, his voice calm but colder than the void outside. Then we just told them they won't. The news of the battle spread faster than the wreckage could cool. Within a week, the footage of Dominion ships breaking under railgun fire was whispered through ports and colonies, replayed on black market broadcasts, and dissected in smoky taverns across the trade lanes. Smaller species, long trapped under the Dominion's thumb, leaned closer to their consoles, hungry for proof that the Empire was not invincible. For the first time in centuries, they saw ships other than Dominion cruisers still standing after direct combat. In the Galactic Council's marble-walled chamber, the laughter that once filled the air had gone silent. Delegates avoided looking at the human representatives, their expressions tight, careful, as if unwilling to acknowledge the shift. Margaret Keene stood at the center podium, her hands steady though her throat burned from hours of debate. You've all seen the transmissions. They didn't send an envoy to negotiate. They sent an invasion force. Humanity didn't fire first, and you know it. If we hadn't resisted, you would have been sitting here today discussing Earth as another Dominion possession. The chamber remained restless but subdued, far different from the mockery of their first appearance. Ministers whispered, but no one laughed. The speaker's long fingers tapped the dais in a gesture that once carried authority, now undercut by doubt. The Dominion's delegation, however, remained defiant. Their lead representative, scaled and armored in ceremonial plates, hissed across the chamber. These are falsehoods. The Dominion has no interest in Earth beyond stabilizing a volatile border. Humanity provoked the conflict. Their crude weapons are a threat to interstellar peace. Margaret's jaw clenched. She wanted to shout, to point at the casualty logs, to drag the proof into their faces. But she knew shouting meant nothing here. Calm words carried more power. A threat? A border stabilizer? Tell me then, why were your cruisers carrying ground troops? Why did we find dropships armed for planetary suppression? Do not insult this council's intelligence. Her words hung like a blade over the room. The Dominion delegate's jaw clicked, his eyes shifting. He said nothing. That silence spoke louder than argument. Wesley sat at the edge of the delegation bench, silent through most of the proceedings, but watching every flicker of alien expression. His uniform was pressed but scarred, a burn mark running across the sleeve that he hadn't bothered to replace. The other officers behind him bore similar marks, quiet reminders that their fleet had bled. When Margaret returned to her seat, she leaned toward him, voice low. They don't believe the Dominion anymore. You can see it. Even if they won't say it out loud. He nodded once. But belief isn't the same as action. Fear still holds them. That fear was real. By the end of the session, the Council had produced no sanctions, no condemnation. The Dominion remained untouchable, if only because everyone feared being noticed. The humans walked out to a hallway filled with stares, none openly hostile now, but none willing to step forward as allies either. Back on the Resolute Dawn, the atmosphere was different. Relief had given way to unease. Crews patched damaged bulkheads, engineers crawled through reactor shafts, and repair lights flickered in red-lit corridors. The ship smelled of metal dust and recycled air. The laughter and adrenaline of their survival had faded into silence broken by muttered curses and the clatter of tools. In the engineering bay, Nora Ward crouched beside a gutted power conduit, grease smeared across her cheek, her hands working through tangled wiring that hadn't been replaced in decades. Dylan Mercer leaned on the railing above, arms folded, watching her with his usual sharpness. "You're still thinking about it," Dylan said. Nora didn't look up. About what? The way their shields cracked. You've replayed the numbers a dozen times since the fight. She hissed as sparks snapped from the panel, pulling her hand back. Because it doesn't make sense. Their shields are supposed to be adaptive. They can resist directed energy, radiation spikes, even particle acceleration. But they couldn't stop a block of metal moving fast enough to punch through atmospheres. It shouldn't have been possible. It was possible, Dylan said, his tone darkly amused. Because no one imagined they'd ever face something that crude. They built the perfect umbrella for storms and we hit them with a stone. She looked up at him finally, her expression hard. Don't get smug about it. We barely survived. We lost ships, Dylan. People. That's not a clever tactic, it's a blood price. Dylan's expression flickered, but his gaze didn't soften. Blood is the price of any war worth winning. Before Nora could answer, Wesley stepped into the bay, his presence pulling both of them upright. He had the kind of stillness that settled a room without raising his voice. Report, Wesley said. Nora exhaled, rubbing grease from her hands onto a rag. We're holding. Barely. The hull can take more of a beating than I thought, but if we keep fighting ships like that, we're going to run out of luck. Wesley looked between them. Luck didn't win the battle. People did. And people will win the next. It was Dylan who broke the silence, leaning slightly closer to Wesley. If there is a next, the Dominion will want this buried. That means they're planning something bigger. He was right. Days later, the truth came through. Interrogations of captured Dominion crew, fragments of decrypted transmissions, and whispers from sympathetic traders painted the same picture. The Dominion attack had not been sanctioned by their full government. It had been orchestrated by a faction inside the Empire, desperate to expand before their strength collapsed entirely. The Dominion wasn't all-powerful. It was fractured. And the cracks were widening. Margaret stared at the intelligence briefings late into the night, the glow of the data casting shadows under her tired eyes. She called Wesley to her office aboard the Dawn. They're weaker than they want anyone to know, she said, shoving the data toward him. They're bleeding territory on their far borders, crushing rebellions, silencing unrest. This invasion of Earth wasn't about strength. It was about desperation. They wanted a quick, clean victory to scare the rest of the galaxy back in line. Wesley studied the reports, his expression unchanging. And instead, they've given the galaxy proof they can lose. She leaned forward. Which means they can't afford to leave us standing. They'll come again, Captain. Not to escort. Not to occupy. To erase. The words sat heavy in the air. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the ship's aging life support filled the silence. Then Wesley set the data pad down, his voice steady. Then we'll have to remind them. If they think Earth will go quietly, they have no idea what we've survived before. Margaret's eyes narrowed, not in doubt but in realization. He wasn't just speaking as a soldier anymore. He was speaking as someone who had already accepted where this was heading. The Dominion wasn't just cracking. It was starting to collapse. The first raid wasn't supposed to work. The fleet moved under cover of the outer asteroid belts, hulking silhouettes half hidden by rock and shadow. The ships creaked and shuddered, patched with new armor plates salvaged from wreckage, their cannons reassembled with parts scavenged from civilian yards. None of it should have held together. Yet when they tore into the Dominion outpost at Yaren Gate, the walls fell like wet paper. It wasn't just the destruction that stunned the galaxy. It was the broadcast. Captain Wesley Grant had stood on the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, jaw set, as holocameras carried his words across every black market frequency and pirate relay. Behind him, Dominion banners burned. Rows of chained prisoners stumbled into the light, species long assumed extinct, their eyes hollow with starvation. They laughed at us, Wesley said. His voice was calm, measured, but heavy enough to carry across the stars. But they will not laugh when their empire burns. The image spread like fire. For the oppressed species who had bowed their heads in silence for centuries, it was more than a battle report. It was a declaration. Humanity, with its scarred fleet of relics, had not only survived the Dominion's attack but struck back. By the time the fleet regrouped, volunteers were waiting. Small crafts flown by ragtag militias, smuggling ships gutted and refitted with crude guns, even defectors from broken Dominion client states. They weren't sleek. They weren't trained. But they came, following the humans into the dark. On the Dawn's hangar deck, the reality of it showed in sweat and exhaustion. Mechanics worked double shifts, converting freighters into gunboats. Engineers from alien worlds argued in broken English with human crewmen, their gestures wild but their goals the same. Nora Ward stood amid the chaos, oil staining her uniform, hair loose and damp from days without rest. She slammed a hydrospanner against a jammed coupling, muttering curses. When it finally clicked into place, she let out a breath that sounded closer to a growl than relief. "Another ship barely held together," she said. "If half of these patched-up drives don't melt mid-flight, it'll be a miracle." Dylan Mercer, leaning against a railing above her, looked down with that same sharp fire in his eyes. "Miracles are overrated. Unpredictability is better. Dominion tacticians can map every engagement, but they can't calculate chaos. And that's exactly what we're giving them." Nora looked up, her face slick with sweat and grease, her patience thin. "Chaos gets people killed. War gets people killed," Dylan shot back. His voice wasn't cruel, but it carried an edge that made her flinch. "The difference is whether those deaths mean something." Wesley's voice cut in from behind them, calm but final. "Enough." Both officers turned, the tension snapping to silence under his presence. Wesley's face was harder now than it had been at the council, his eyes lined with exhaustion, but steady with the weight of someone who knew what had to be done. He walked past them, surveying the half-assembled fighters and the crews running themselves raw. His voice carried low but firm. "This isn't about chaos or order. It's about survival. Every ship we launch makes the Dominion weaker. Every life we save makes us stronger. That's the only equation that matters." The next raids cut deeper. Supply depots ignited. Shipyards sabotaged. Garrison worlds lit up with rebellion the moment human slugs punched through Dominion shields. The fleet became more than a blunt instrument. It became a rallying cry. But the cost came with it. On the third raid, the destroyer Hallowspire took a direct hit through its reactor. Half the crew never made it to escape pods. In the briefing room afterward, Wesley stared at the casualty numbers, his throat tight, the silence around the table heavier than gravity. Dylan tried to frame it as necessary sacrifice, but his words felt brittle in the air. Even he couldn't disguise the loss. Nora slammed her datapad down, her voice breaking. "Necessary? Tell that to the ones we just spaced into the void. We're bleeding, and if you think this is sustainable, you're lying to yourself." Wesley didn't stop her anger. He let it cut through the air because it was the truth they all carried. It was Margaret Keene who steadied them when she appeared through HoloLink, her office back on Earth lined with stacks of unopened reports, her face pale from too many sleepless nights. "The Council is divided," she said. "Some members are whispering that if the Dominion can lose to you, they might lose elsewhere. That's why the Dominion is doubling down. They know if word spreads too far, the cracks in their empire won't hold." She leaned forward, her eyes sharp despite the fatigue. "You've forced them into a corner. That makes them dangerous. Desperation makes them brutal. Don't underestimate what's coming next." She was right. The Dominion's counterattack came swift and merciless. They targeted colonies on the edges of human-controlled space, bombing civilian infrastructure, trying to force Earth's fleet to retreat. They were no longer mocking, no longer laughing. They were furious. Humanity fought back with what it had left, throwing everything into the fire. Dylan orchestrated ambushes in asteroid fields, turning the terrain into weapons. Nora kept ships flying long past the point of breaking, her hands raw, her voice hoarse from screaming at engines to hold together. Wesley carried the weight of command, every loss etching deeper into his face, his decisions cutting closer to sacrifice with each battle. And then came the raid that changed everything. The fleet hit a Dominion fortress world, expecting a hard fight. What they found instead froze the blood of every crew member who saw it. Not weapons. Not soldiers. Camps. Vast stretches of land filled with caged species, generations enslaved, their numbers staggering. Entire peoples broken and hidden away, the Dominion feeding on their labor, erasing them from history books. The silence on the bridge was suffocating when the images came through. Even Dylan's voice, usually so sharp, faltered. "My God." Nora's hands covered her mouth. She whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "How long? How many?" Wesley stared at the screens, his jaw tight, the horror sitting heavy in his chest. This wasn't just about Earth anymore. It had never been just about Earth. The decision came without debate. They opened the cages. They burned the fortress. And as the freed captives poured into the light, Wesley gave the order that would define the rest of the war. No more running. No more waiting. We take the fight to the heart of their empire. The galaxy saw the images. The slaves freed. The Dominion banners burning. Humanity standing in front of the camps, their fleet scarred but unbroken. It wasn't just rebellion anymore. It was war. And the Dominion, already cracking, could no longer hide it. The Dominion had always seemed eternal. Its fleet stretched across hundreds of systems, its laws carved into the bones of conquered worlds. To think of it falling had been laughable, the kind of drunken fantasy whispered in dark bars. Yet now, as cracks spread through the Empire, laughter turned to silence. The raids had become more than raids. They were full-scale assaults. The resolute Dawn led a fractured armada through burning trade lanes, its hull scorched and pitted, its banners stripped down to nothing but steel. Around it flew an army that shouldn't have existed. Freighters welded with cannons, smuggler ships turned into carriers, scavenged Dominion frigates flown by newly freed species. Every ship bore the scars of survival, their patchwork armor a symbol of defiance. In the strategy chamber, Wesley stood over the glowing map of Dominion space, his hands braced against the table. The stars pulsed red where resistance was spreading. Outposts lost contact. Governors reported revolts. Supply chains buckled. "This is the breaking point," Dylan said, his voice firm, his eyes lit with the kind of fire that bordered on obsession. "They're stretched thin. We hit the central hub at Relos Prime and the whole network collapses. We end this." Nora's voice cut sharp across the table. "You're talking about a fortress world. Triple-layer shields, planetary cannons, a fleet larger than everything we've faced combined. Charging into that isn't strategy, it's suicide." "Not if we don't give them time to think," Dylan shot back. "Shock and speed. They won't expect an attack on their hearts so soon. If we wait, they'll regroup. And then this chance dies." The room fell quiet. Wesley looked between them, the weight of command pressing down like gravity. He could feel the truth in both their words. Dylan's hunger for decisive action. Nora's fear that they were walking into a grave. Finally he spoke, his voice calm, steady, unshaken. "We go." The silence that followed was not agreement. It was acceptance. The march to Relos was like tearing through fire. The Dominion threw everything in their path, desperate to choke the humans before they reached the core. Battles burned through nebulae thick with ion storms, in asteroid belts where wreckage became new debris, in skies over half-dead colonies where enslaved populations rose the moment they saw human banners. Every victory cost them ships. Every step forward left wrecks trailing in their wake. In the hangars, Nora worked until her hands bled. Engines screamed in protest, their fuel lines patched with jury-rigged tubing. She screamed back, forcing them to live another battle. Every time a pilot limped back into the bay, she clutched them like family, but far too many times the bays stayed empty. On the bridge, Dylan plotted strikes with an intensity that unnerved the crew. His strategies were brilliant, ruthless, designed to cut through larger fleets by bleeding them dry. Yet behind his eyes there was something sharp and unyielding, a hunger to see the Dominion burn at any cost. Wesley saw it, but he said nothing. He needed Dylan's fire. He needed Nora's stubborn will. And most of all, he needed the galaxy to believe humanity would not break. Then came Relos Prime. The fortress world filled the viewport, a planet wreathed in rings of orbital guns and shipyards, its skies choked with warships. It looked less like a world and more like a blade pointed at the throat of the galaxy. The battle began before they even reached orbit. Dominion fleets poured in from every angle, desperate to hold their capital. The void lit up with fire, ships bursting into shrapnel, shields boiling under sustained fire. On the dawn, alarms screamed as the bridge rocked with impact after impact. Wesley gripped the console, barking orders as the crew scrambled. Dylan's voice cut through, shouting coordinates, sending wings into suicidal flanking maneuvers that somehow worked. Nora's frantic voice came through the comms, swearing at engines on the brink of collapse, holding the ship together with her fury. The fight dragged into hours. Ships fell on both sides, wreckage turning space into a graveyard. Every Dominion ship destroyed was met with cheers, but the cheers were quieter each time as more human ships went dark. Finally, they broke through the last line of defense. The Dawn dove toward the fortress, its cannons hammering at the shield grid, joined by the patchwork fleet behind it. Nora's voice screamed over comms. "We can't keep this up. The core's overheating, we're minutes away from meltdown." "Hold it together," Dylan roared back. "One more push, that's all we need." The shield flickered. Then it fell. The human fleet poured fire into the planet's defenses, ripping holes through orbital stations, detonating fuel silos, sending the fortress into chaos. On the ground, rebellions ignited instantly. Entire districts rose in fire, their chains broken as Dominion forces faltered. But victory came at the cost of blood. The resolute Dawn took a direct hit from a planetary cannon. The blast ripped through decks, venting crew into space. Nora's section went dark for minutes before her voice came back, ragged and furious, screaming that she wasn't dead yet and neither was the ship. Dylan led the final strike, taking a stolen Dominion cruiser straight into the heart of the planetary command grid. His last transmission was sharp, steady, without fear. "Tell them we lit the fire. Tell them it doesn't go out." The explosion tore the sky apart. The command grid collapsed. The fortress fell. When the smoke cleared, the Dominion wasn't dead, but it was broken. Word of reloads spread faster than light, carried by smugglers, rebels, defectors, anyone who saw it. Species long chained in silence rose up. Governors abandoned posts. Soldiers refused orders. The empire that had seemed immortal began to fracture, system by system, world by world. On the dawn, Wesley stood in the ruined bridge, the galaxy's noise echoing through comms. His crew was bloodied, his fleet reduced to fragments, Dylan gone, and Nora half-conscious on the floor but alive. The ship was barely holding, but it had endured. He looked out at the wreckage of Relos, the once untouchable fortress burning. His voice was quiet, almost to himself. "They'll tell stories of this. But the truth is, we don't know what we've unleashed." Because in the silence after the battle, there was no laughter. No cheers. Only the weight of a galaxy tearing itself apart. The Dominion was falling, but what would rise from its ashes was anyone's guess.